Hi, this is Jeffrey Tucker, founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. I'm very pleased to be hanging out today with the key players in Students Against Mandates. Leigh and Brandon, why don't you introduce yourself? Let's start with you, Leigh.
Well, I'm Leigh Vossen. I'm the founder and president of Students Against Mandates. I'm a graphic designer and a former student at Red River College.
I'm Brandon Paradoski, the Vice President of Students Against Mandates. I presently am a Master's of Science student at the University of Manitoba in the Immunology Department.
Oh my goodness. Okay, wow, that's two very different. So, well, let me just say, what is Students Against Mandates trying to do? Obviously, the name, I guess, sort of sums it all up.
Yeah, well, we actually have a number of things going on. So, the major one right now is we're trying to sue the universities and colleges in Manitoba for implementing mandates, unjust mandates. But we also have a number of initiatives and projects. So, we have a series called Opening Up, where we interview people who have been dehumanized by the media, people who have had adverse reactions or have a unique story to tell or insight, whether they professors or educators and whatnot. So we have that. We do protests. We have social events for people who've not been able to socialize with people because they've been isolated. So yeah, we do quite a number of things. It's pretty broad, and we're expanding all the time.
Yeah, maybe I'll touch on our interviews. So we've been interviewing some doctors and scientists and sort of starting to get the word out about the last 2 years and how this has put so much pressure on students and just begin the conversation of talking about the stuff that was sort of taboo to talk about over the last 2 years. But yeah.
Oh, well, the guests we could actually
You know,
mention. We've had Dr. Stephen Pellick, UBC professor, PhD professor. We've had Dr. Julie Panesi, a former ethics professor. We've had Brian Peckford, the last living signatory of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So we've had a number of guests. Harry Wade, who was arrested from his university at Western for not wearing a mask. We've had some really interesting guests on some really amazing conversations so far.
and right now you're still. It's not just about your universities, but you can't even travel to the U.S. Is that correct?
Not to the U.S. Like we haven't gone to the U.S. We were in Ottawa for the Freedom Convoy.
But yeah, we technically can't cross the
Oh,
border.
sorry, I
Yeah. So there
misunderstood.
is
Yeah.
still travel restrictions on unvaccinated people. You can't basically leave the country and come back in is the current situation in Canada right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, no
And and
train.
and that's that's a U.S. rule too, right? If I'm correct about that.
Yeah, so we spoke to someone recently who tried to cross the border. They didn't have the sort of QR code for having their vaccine, and the U.S. border denied them actually and sent them back into Canada. So it's
Oh,
sort of a gray area right
yeah.
now.
On top of that, too, though, him coming back in, he didn't want to download this app. I can't remember what it's called. It's kind of a lengthy title, but he didn't want to download the app. So they were saying we're going to fine you $5,000 if you don't download the app, and uh,
It's
it's quite complicated.
yeah, it's
But
like a federal government sanctioned app. I think it's called Arrive Canada, and you need this app to essentially leave Canada and come back in. And he didn't want to download that, and he was also unvaccinated, so they refused him um, entry into the states, and then tried to slap him with that fine.
Amazing. Let's kind of go back in time, if you wouldn't mind, back to 2020. So your university's locked down, just like they did in most parts of the world, and you immediately had to go to Zoom classes. Is that right?
yes, that's right. So at the time, I actually graduated from Red River from the graphic design program 2018, but I went back during COVID for business administration. And in 2021, I got an email saying that uh, students would not be allowed, unvaccinated students would not be allowed back unless, well, actually, there were no exemptions even provided. Like, there's religious exemptions and whatnot. They weren't going to be providing those at all. But in 2021, everyone had gone to online classes at that time. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll speak on behalf of University of Manitoba, not on behalf of University of Manitoba, but talking on University of Manitoba. since 2020, the winter term, classes went online in maybe March, sometime mid March, and they stayed online ever since that. Um, Fall 2021, they started implementing a vaccine mandate and then began the process of preventing unvaccinated students from entering campus at all. So you couldn't attend a lab if you had thesis work or anything like that. And they began deregistering students as well from online classes if they did not upload proof of vaccination. So that's sort of the current situation still at the University of Manitoba.
So you couldn't go to online classes?
Yeah, as insane as that is, they began deregistering students from online classes even for not uploading proof because they were saying, oh, well, we might go back in person. So if it goes back in person, you can't come anyways. So these classes that are online, we're going to deregister you from them.
Yeah, and we have like hundreds of students who've contacted us about being deregistered and getting information from them about that. But there's been a lot of students, especially from U of M, who've been deregistered from their classes.
Do they get their money back?
Not to my understanding.
No, there hasn't been any funds coming back. Yeah, I wouldn't bank on getting that money back right now.
And then what do you hear about the dormitory situation? What happened in that case, starting in 2020 and going forward?
I'm not totally familiar with that. I did talk to one of my former classmates. We met for coffee before the mandate shut down. Going for coffee, she was saying she wouldn't be allowed to stay in her dorm if she didn't get double vaxxed. So she had to, because otherwise she'd have to go back to Hong Kong, and she didn't want to have to go back to Hong Kong before getting her Canadian passport. So she was kind of trapped and she was forced into getting it. But I don't know the situation for a lot of other students. I'm sure it would have been a similar situation of being deregistered and kicked out of the dorms, though. But that was just Red River College. I don't know about University of Manitoba or the other ones throughout Manitoba.
Well,
And
a
besides,
lot of U.S. Universities, people were stuck in their rooms. They were basically imprisoned inside their dorm rooms and fined if they held dorm room parties and that sort of thing.
It's just ridiculous. It's
I mean,
nonsensical.
the people who are least at risk, the young university students, are going through disproportionate measures through the last 2 years. It's been tough on a lot of students for sure.
Yeah. And we've been
Yeah,
hearing not just from
it's really
students, but
embittering.
from professors. Pardon?
Yeah, yeah, students and professors, and you're aware of professors like Ponese who were fired, but there are probably dozens, if not hundreds more, right?
Yeah, I mean, even for my own college, a former teacher of mine herself, she was at risk from being fired. She got the first vaccine and couldn't get the second one due to health issues. And she was going to be fired. It didn't end up happening, but for a while there, she was being threatened with being fired and not being allowed to come back to campus. So a lot of people have been put in terrible situations because of the academic institutions and their choices.
Uh, Let me get one of you to or both of you to make the case for why there shouldn't be these mandates. The general perception, and I could make the case myself, but I thought I would just let you make it. The idea is that, well, we all need to stay safe from COVID, and nobody's safe unless everybody's safe, and these vaccines work to stop, I don't know, infection or the vaccines are vaccines,
Yeah.
and that the community is not going to feel comfortable with unvaccinated people around. You just want to address, because I'm sure you must deal with this stuff every single day. What do you usually say to that?
So maybe I'll start first. One of the first things would be the disproportionate level of risk between someone who's old and then someone who's a university student. And applying the same measures to both of them doesn't really make sense. Secondly, would be addressing the vaccines. The vaccines aren't stopping transmission nor infection. So if at all, taking the vaccine would be a personal choice because it would be protecting yourself and isn't protecting someone else. So although that is great that the university wants me to protect myself, I'm not putting someone else at risk. So at the end of the day, it should be a personal decision whether I take this medical injection or not. And then on top of that, for just getting into general vaccines, these shots were produced in a quick time manner. There's no long-term safety on them. And just looking at that point where there's risk, there should be choice. And not to mention the universities have essentially ignored natural immunity, which at this point is well documented, well published. And that's something they don't provide evidence against. When you ask the university, why can't students who have natural immunity and can provide proof of that, why can't they be on campus? They sort of just reference experts. And when you ask who the experts are or any evidence, they stop the conversation right there and say, we don't want to talk to you anymore. So by denying natural immunity and by forcing students to take a novel injection, that doesn't stop them from transmitting the virus. It really doesn't make sense. And considering, without going into risks of the COVID shots, it should definitely be a personal choice, especially how low risk healthy university students are to this virus in particular.
Yeah, their whole
When you say,
Go ahead, sorry.
well, when you say at risk, you mean at risk of severe outcomes, right? Because I mean, I'm presuming that everybody knows that basically everybody's going to get COVID at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there really wasn't any stopping of transmitting COVID. You could look to the signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, the authors on your website. Inevitably, everybody was going to get COVID at some point or already has gotten COVID. And these particular vaccines aren't stopping infection, and they're not stopping you from transmitting it. So just based on that evidence, it should be a personal choice, especially with risk and the growing amount of publications on the potential risks of these shots. So from that in itself, there should be choice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he summed it up perfectly, but the argument that the university is making just crumbles when you bring up these points. As he said, he's contacted the university numerous times and asked, let's have a conversation about it, and they refused to. And I actually emailed numerous times, many times, the president of my college and called, left voicemails requesting a meeting on behalf of all these concerned students, and he refused to meet with me or discuss why he's implementing these mandates. But there seems to be no real reason to segregate vaccinated and unvaccinated, because the vaccine or the virus doesn't discriminate against who's vaccinated, who's unvaccinated. There's equal transmission, right? So there's no real case for separating unvaccinated and vaccinated students. It just leads to students who are more harm, more psychological harm, and people are discriminating unvaccinated students, and they're not receiving proper education, and access to proper education is just not right. When they also
there's also
with natural immunity, but sorry.
Yeah, the natural immunity point is, as you probably know, I mean, as every trucker in Canada knows, Brownstone Institute has assembled 150 studies on natural immunity, none of which should be necessary, since we've known about natural immunity for 2,500 years. And ironically, as time has gone on, we realize that natural immunity is the way we get out of the pandemic. I mean, which is, by the way, how we've gotten out of every pandemic in the past. So there's nothing surprising there. You can't vaccinate your way out of this pandemic for a variety of reasons specialized to this particular virus. But I wanted to ask you about another aspect of the vaccine that's fairly interesting, and and I think a little surprising, maybe, although it's hard to know what's surprising and what's not. But the effects of the vaccine, to the extent it's efficacious against severe outcomes, like hospitalization and death, or I think even to some extent infection, wanes very rapidly, right? So we're talking about 3, 4, 5 months or something like this, um, and that seems a little peculiar. But in your universities, if you get vaccinated, I don't know, say January, I don't know, February 2021, your that immunity, or that whatever the efficaciousness of the vaccine is, it's already sort of gone, but you're still considered fully vaxxed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, going off that point, it just seems a little bit hand waving, like the vax pass is being sort of called an immunity pass when it's not, going off the point that you said that the immunity is not long lasting. So it doesn't really make sense to be demanding students to take these vaccines generated against an ancestral strain back 2 years ago to the Wuhan strain, when the circulating strain is Omicron, which has like 37 mutations in its spike protein, which is what the vaccines are raised against. And so people getting a vaccine a year ago now or longer, and if you look at the length of time the immunity is lasting, it really doesn't make sense to allow those people, I mean, allow those people to be free to go around and spread the virus when someone who can provide antibody proof or provide documentation of or current infection to be banned from campus. It really doesn't make sense from that point of view, just in the length of immunity, and considering the fact that the circulating strain is not the strain that they initially developed the vaccine against. In my mind, that doesn't really make sense to me anyhow.
Yeah, when you know the facts, the actions the universities are taking don't make any sense. It really is just they're trying to do what they think is popular, it seems. So they're not being criticized or something, but it's just not it's not the actions of what a leader should be doing. Like the presidents of the universities are not leading the academic institutions.
Right.
But I think there's not
It's
even.
also unscientific.
Go
I'm
ahead,
just
sir.
imagining I'm just imagining, a situation where maybe they've been asleep for the last 2 years, and they're listening to this interview right now, and they're just wondering, how is it possible that such policies could be in place when you have 4, 5, 6, 10, 30 devastating arguments against these policies. It's all a little bit crazy, and you're writing the presidents, and they're not answering your emails. You write this department, that department, and you attribute the sort of complete absence of science of this kind of stuff to public pressure, popular opinion, that sort of thing. But there's also, isn't it the case
Yeah,
that government itself is pressuring the universities too?
yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah, I wouldn't
sure.
limit it to popular opinion at all. I think there's a large number of reasons why. But I also wouldn't want to speculate you can if you'd like, but I wouldn't want to say exactly what it is if I'm not sure.
Yeah, we could speculate on the reasons. The federal government definitely is sending out messages like that to pressure businesses and, for that matter, universities. Our prime minister came out and saying, don't expect to be going on a plane or a train if you're unvaccinated. He called unvaccinated people racist, misogynistic, and don't believe in science. So when you hear name calling like that, and you hear things like that coming from your prime minister, it's hard to imagine that he has your best interest at heart when he's saying rhetoric like that.
Yeah,
But that's also putting pressure on businesses and universities for sure.
yeah.
That raises a point I'd like to bring up, and something I think it just occurred to me today. Um, there might be a way in which the choice to get vaccinated uh, uh, or adopt for the risks associated with natural immunity. Like you believe there's a legitimate trade-off there, and there is, right? I mean, we know this from the literature, that especially for men in a college age group, the risks of myocarditis are higher than the risks of COVID. I mean, we know this. So, but that the willingness to remain unvaccinated in this current environment might select more for people who are generally dissidents against prevailing official political narratives, cultural narratives, and that sort of thing, which makes me wonder. And I've wondered about this, especially in the American case, if the whole vaccine mandate thing is a kind of a proxy war that's really about, at the margin, purging people who are not willing to go along with the prevailing narratives, the dissidents, the rebels, in other words. I wonder whether you think there's any validity to that observation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see people labeling individuals as anti-vaxxers who aren't anti-vaxxers. They've had plenty of shots, different vaccine shots, but they're questioning this one. And it's like anyone who questions on social media is censored. There definitely is this. You can see that anyone who dissents is being shut down, censored, labeled words that the prime minister, as Bren was saying, labeling them like misogynist, racist, where there's no real validity to that. And you kind of have to question why this is happening and what the motivations are behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just the complete censorship of free speech and also open scientific debates. I mean, some of your authors that you have at Brownstone could probably attest to this better, like Martin Koldarf or what have you. That lack of just open conversation and debate of finding the truth is sort of being squashed through this process, especially at universities. Um, Even if you look on the news, it's just one-sided experts saying the opinion essentially of the government. There's never been a roundtable discussion of opposing views on the COVID shots or like should natural immunity be counted, masking. There's never been a debate. It's sort of been, you just need to believe this and you need to accept this because we did the science. We know what's best for you. You need to follow suit with this and you need to believe it too. That's my opinion of what's going on. But I think in all avenues, in all areas, it's sort of this woke sort of culture that there can only be one train of thought, one belief. And sort of if anyone opposes that, they need to be squashed or suppressed or silenced or misinformation or whatever you want to call it. Essentially, that in my mind, that's what I think is going on.
I mean, even you see with trust the science, that little slogan Fauci has, I've brought this up a couple times to Brandon, but you shouldn't trust science, you should question it. Science demands to be questioned, and they're treating it as almost a religion, and it's not. And you just have to question why they would be doing this. Someone like Dr. Fauci should know better than that. But that's just not what's happening. There's no discourse, open discourse. There's no debates happening. Anyone who says something counter to the narrative, as we were saying, are being censored and shut down. Our own Instagram account has been censored numerous times in various ways. It's ridiculous. I mean, quotes, I'll post a Abraham Lincoln quote and it's flagged as misinformation. It's absurd. It's almost kind of funny at this point, but it's not, because it's very serious.
Well, this is a very dark outlook, and as much as I've written about this, I swear I only sort of fully understood this today, or not understood, but thought about this today. That if this really is about purging the academy or intellectual life of dissidents, so that there's only one view left, and that the vaccine is just being used as a kind of a proxy for your willingness to comply, with the prevailing regime priorities. This could sort of fundamentally restructure higher education. We get rid of enough rebellious students, or forget rebellious, scientific, people who question the narrative, get rid of those people, get rid of the professors too. You've got the sort of consolidation of power from of just one point of view within intellectual life in the West.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our universities even have become seemingly indoctrination centers. I know someone who is in medicine, he's just become a doctor, and who's saying it's definitely very left leaning, the education he's getting. And that's not um, what it should be. You should be presented with different ideas and taught how to think critically and break these arguments apart and decide for yourself what the right answer is, not being told by instructors, this is the only thing you can listen to. I mean, take what's her name, Lindsay Shepherd at Laurier with the Jordan Peterson thing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but she presented Jordan Peterson's ideas and opposing views from Jordan Peterson's and presented as a debate. And she was ridiculed for that and talked down to by her dean and everything. You cannot present Jordan Peterson's ideas to your audience because they're too young. We need to teach them what to think, not come up with their own opinions. And they're university students. Absolutely, they should be thinking for themselves and hearing both sides of an argument. But the dean said it was damaging to students to hear his views because they're dangerous. It's absurd. And I think really we're not just fighting for students to get an education and to fight these mandates, but we are fighting against all of this. It doesn't just stop at the mandates. Yeah, this is a bigger issue, and there's a bigger picture. And we both have realized this for some time throughout the entirety of the pandemic. The only people I knew who kind of saw what was going on was my family members, and it felt isolating not having anyone else to talk to about it. But I felt very concerned as to the direction this was headed. You look at history, and you start to see parallels and patterns. And I was thinking, this is not just about this is nothing to do with public health. This is a far greater issue. To me, it seems about control and ideology.
Yeah, I would say this is just setting the stage for.
Right.
I was just going to say this is setting the stage for sort of a large groupthink because you're taking away, as you said, dissidents or anyone with an opposing view from any of these professional programs like medicine or law or engineering, because these students can't progress in the programs if they can't attend the university. So your next generation of professionals are all going to be sort of streamlined into this thought, or sort of like too scared to speak their minds because of the repercussions of what may happen to them.
It's a frightening thing to think that the vaccines or public health or really disease is being used as a kind of a wedge issue to divide people politically. Although I've seen that for at least a year or really a year and a half in the United States. I began to realize that COVID itself was being so highly politicized, which is depressing to me because I'm very close with Martin Kulldorff. I mean, close enough to understand the way he thinks. And this man is all about the data, right? It's all about the studies, all about the science. And that's what drives him. And he's not, doesn't have a political agenda at all. He's just interested in looking at the reality of the disease, the vaccines, its efficacy, the safety, the harms of lockdowns and so on. But he's, I don't even know his politics, and I'm one of his best friends, actually. So it's just remarkable to see the way this has been used. Let me ask you about, obviously, your organization and your voices here represent a minority view among students, and not that it matters, but do you think that the number of students who resent being told what to do are bigger or smaller than is popularly understood?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're a minority, especially a year ago. But I've noticed it's growing. People are starting to open their eyes as things get more and more ridiculous, and the narrative is breaking down. So that is good. I do think, unfortunately, the majority appear to be under this, psychosis, mass formation psychosis that Dr. Robert Malone has spoken about. But um, I've been able to have conversations with people and see how they're slowly opening their eyes to this, whereas maybe a year ago they thought, my ideas were ridiculous or wouldn't want to even talk about it. So I have a lot of hope, but currently I do think we're the minority. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think that too. I think most university age students don't really want to rock the boat. So even if they do think something's wrong, they're not necessarily going to advocate for change or want to do something about it. Other students, it doesn't affect them. Maybe they're vaccinated and then just don't really care because it doesn't seem like it's their problem right now, at least. Which I would say it's going to be your problem anyways, whether you realize that or not. Um, and then some students maybe just want to put their trust in the government, and they'd rather have their trust in like those higher sort of officials than listen to someone like their friend or whatever talk about this. So I think we're the minority right now, but when students start to realize the implications of the lockdowns, the implication of these mandates, the implications of these shots, the implication on the economy, the psychological damage, I think there's going to be a lot more students joining our side and joining our message, but they haven't fully comprehended what the last 2 years actually meant and the damage that will actually come from the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if all students knew that and knew what's at stake, they would definitely, I think, would take our side and be advocating for this. But
Yeah.
I think through the media, through social media, suppressing information, it's really prevented that from happening.
Yeah.
So
It's really about people need to speak up. And the more we have these conversations and make that okay, we'll be able to change people's minds. But people need to stand up and have those conversations. As you were saying, it can be quite hard with everything seemingly against us in terms of the censorship, but also just the tactics or the restrictions. You have to wear a mask. You have to 6 feet social distance. You can't go into work. You have to work from home. You're not able to sit down and have conversations with people like you used to, sit down at the lunch table at work and discuss these ideas. Um, so it's been very beneficial for the other side to have everyone so
distance.
isolated and to feel like they're alone. You're being bombarded with information on social media. Young people, high school students and university students being bombarded on social media um, by these one-sided ideas. I mean, as I was saying, a year ago, I felt like I was entirely alone. I had no idea how many other students shared my views. And even like family members, extended family members at family reunions, I was too nervous to say anything to them. So we didn't talk about it. And when I created Students Against Mandates and they found out about it, they contacted me and said, we agree with you. But we were never able to talk about it because we were too scared of what you would say. So the more we just speak the truth, the better things will be.
Have you been contacted by a lot of media? Do you do a lot of interviews and give a lot of quotations to newspapers and podcasts and that sort of thing?
We've done a few interviews, mostly with alternative media, but not newspapers don't reach out to us. I actually had the Red River College student newsletter reach out to me, and I did a whole interview with her, and she didn't quote me once in the article or didn't use anything I said. I gave very articulate reasons as to why I had this view and didn't use it or summarize it or anything. So I don't think they want to hear our views or opinions. Mainstream media doesn't, but alternative media we've spoken to. We do a lot of interviews ourselves though, and reach out to people a lot, and that's been primarily the interviews we've done is us interviewing.
Do you see any chance at all that because in the U.S. I think we've seen the repeal of a lot of these mandates in a lot of colleges. They're stepping back from them, and I don't think that was the intention. I think they intended to keep in cities too, right? Boston and D.C. and New Orleans and that sort of thing. I think they intended to keep these mandates in place for as long as possible, but they've repealed them due to public pressure. Are you seeing some of that take place in where you're from?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that one. So I agree with you. I don't think they were going to repeal any of these mandates. If you back it up to January, at least in Canada, in the province of Quebec, they wanted to tax the unvaccinated. That's what the premier was saying. And then, just quoting myself earlier, our prime minister, Justin Trudeau, was calling unvaccinated people racist and misogynistic, don't believe in science. So if we back it up to that, there's no indication you're going to drop any of these restrictions treating unvaccinated people like that. But then through the Freedom Convoy, I think it started to open a lot of eyes to broader Canada of like, this really doesn't make sense. These people have a point here. Why isn't the government bringing up at least a plan to end the restrictions, at least put in a plan in place to move out of the pandemic emergency? But they refused to even put in a plan. And then just his handling of the Freedom Convoy, refusing to even meet with the people at the Freedom Convoy and even discuss, work to some sort of agreement. It's sort of just been, this is how it is. We're going to tell you how it is. And so just going off that, there's absolutely no indication that they were going to drop these mandates. But I think the pressure from the Freedom Convoy that spread like wildfire around the world, and people were just sick of these lockdowns, like the studies coming out that the lockdowns didn't do anything from Johns Hopkins, the effects on the economy, the psychological effects, like the mask wearing on young children. There's just so many detrimental effects that people were starting to realize that I think they had to, but I don't think they wanted to if there wasn't such a public uproar or pushback.
Yeah, that was huge.
And do you have chapters at many universities, or do you have memberships, or you just kind of keep a private email list, or how is it that you go about your organizing and recruitment?
Well, we have a website, studentsagainstmandates.ca, and people can become a member through there, and we have a newsletter that we can reach out to people. We started off, as this has grown, it's become more organized, obviously. We started off just with a Telegram chat, has hundreds of students in there. I actually have started creating different chats for teachers, so any teachers who want to connect with like-minded teachers, we have a chat there. I have one for paramedics. So it started with students, and it's definitely focused on students, but we have people from all over the world that we're in contact with, and just concerned citizens, people in different trades and positions, parents, just pretty much everybody have been
Maybe I'll mention
in contact.
too, so we've been also speaking to students at different universities. We're reaching out to some groups in Ontario, and then also a group I think in Alberta that we've been speaking to. So we've been trying to coordinate that, students at different universities across Canada, and trying to link some of the smaller student groups with us to sort of join the effort together. Yeah. Which is something we're currently working on. But.
Yeah, I regularly meet, actually. I'll have someone, message me on the Instagram and say, hey, I'm a teacher from this school in Alberta, and I have a small group, and we're trying to fight the mask mandates on our children. And I'll meet with them on Zoom and discuss strategy and try to help them out the best that I can. So it's not limited to just university
there's been so
students.
many people reaching out to us just complaining about the university's mandates. They've been messaging about like adverse events or like reactions to the shots and all these different, like a myriad of different things that we've been privy to starting this group. So
well, if your stream of communications is anything like Brownstone Institute, it's like I can just imagine. I mean, our inbox is flooded all day long with very sad stories and people desperate to find answers. And this has been a very confusing and difficult time for everybody. Well, I mean, I suppose at some level it's given you an education in itself just to see society go absolutely bonkers. I mean, it's not exactly what you signed up to learn in college, but
I was telling my family members, I went and was doing business administration to learn how to run a business, and because I was essentially not allowed to go to class, I learned how to run a business
Well, that's wonderful. And you've given your website name, but please give it again.
That's studentsagainstmandates.ca.
Okay.
And the .ca is important because there's another one called studentsagainstmandates.com, but that's a US group actually. But yeah, we're .ca.
Okay. Okay.
And then the
That's
Instagram
wonderful.
is at students_against_mandates.
And that's not being taken down yet.
Not yet.
Towing the line.
Yeah, it's definitely towing the line. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, thank you, Leigh and Brandon, so much for your time and for sharing your content with the Brownstone Institute. And I'm glad to consider you comrades in arms. And I hope you stay optimistic as I try to. And let's see if we can get through this and hopefully move to a world of more freedom and better science, right?
Absolutely. We can definitely do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.